Are you kidding me? A woman thinks she belongs here? The harsh laughter cracked through the air as Rachel Carter stood quietly in the crowd at the Coney Island Air Show. Just an ordinary yoga instructor, in a faded hoodie and worn-out sneakers. No one knew that 12 years ago that very name once made all of Top Gun tremble. Today, under the blazing sun on the beach, she was dismissed as an outsider. But then, an SOS tore through the sky from the cockpit of an F-22, and the name Valkyrie came alive again. Rachel lived in a small coastal town on Long Island, where waves crashed against the rocky shore like the steady breathing of old fishermen. Her mornings were nothing more dramatic than a modest yoga studio, the scent of worn wood mixed with faint incense and the even size of elderly students. The apartment she rented barely fit a bed, a small table, and a window overlooking an oil-stained parking lot. To those around her, she was simply Miss Carter, a gentle, quiet woman, polite, but nothing memorable enough to stick in anyone's mind. Today, the town was anything but quiet. The air show had drawn thousands to the beach at Coney Island, bringing flags, cameras, shouts, and trays of hot dogs drenched in bright yellow mustard. Overhead, F-22 seconds roared past, leaving behind thunder and thin white trails like chalk marks across the sky. Children ran wild, pointing upward with mouths wide open. Adults raised their phones, desperate to trap that steel moment inside their small screens. Rachel stood at the edge, neither cheering nor lifting a camera. A faded gray hoodie, frayed jeans, worn-out sneakers. Her hair loosely tied, a few strands breaking free in the ocean breeze. She looked like nothing, out of sync with the spectacle unfolding around her. In her pocket, her hand closed around a small metal keychain shaped like a jet, heavier than her outward indifference. The call of a vendor sliced through the noise. An old man selling hot dogs jabbed his tongs in her direction, his voice roughened by smoke and grease. "Hey lady, this isn't a meditation spot." The group of young men nearby burst out laughing. A few glanced at Rachel, shaking their heads as if they'd just spotted someone who'd wandered onto the wrong movie set. None of them knew that 12 years ago, the woman they mocked once made the skies over Miramar hold its breath. Rachel didn't reply. She only tilted her head slightly, eyes fixed on the raptor twisting in a tight spiral above. Sunlight flashed off the canopy, glinting like an old memory being pulled from the depths of her chest. Around her, the scene pulsed like a national holiday. Families spread blankets, unpacked picnic baskets, baseball caps with USAF logos lined up for beer. A woman in a loud floral dress stopped, looked Rachel up and down. The pinch of her brow said it all. She doesn't belong here. The woman walked on, leaving behind the overpowering trail of perfume mingled with jet fuel. Rachel remained still, quiet as a misplaced stone in the sand. But in her hand, the keychain bit into her skin, leaving a red mark. A fragment of the past still thudded against her ribs, no matter how hard she had tried to bury it for more than a decade. A few rows away, a veteran sat in a folding chair, a cap stitched with Vietnam veteran shading his eyes. He squinted at Rachel, tilting his head as if trying to place her. Then he chuckled dryly, turning to his friend. "Thought I saw her at Miramar once, but nah, must be wrong. That one quit early." Rachel heard every word, her lips pressed tight, her shoulders lifting slightly, her body reacting before her mind could intervene. Then she exhaled, letting the ocean wind carry it away. Above, engines roared harder. 2F-22 seconds pulled into sharp turns, the crowd craning their necks in unison. A child nearby shouted with glee, his ice cream tumbling into the sand. Rachel's eyes followed it, rolling away a small, trivial moment that pierced her memory. She had once been that child, standing by the fence at an airbase, staring skyward with burning eyes. Back then, no one believed she could ever become a pilot, let alone stand among Top Gun's finest. But that was a story no one here knew. To them, she was just another nameless figure squeezed into the crowd, a ripple lost in the sea of noise, destined to be forgotten as soon as the fireworks lit the night. Rachel inhaled deeply, the salt of the ocean mixing with the acrid tang of jet fuel. Every sense seemed to awaken, yet she stayed rooted, her eyes never leaving the raptor slicing through the blue. No one noticed that in those eyes was something different. An understanding, a hunger, and a steadiness only those who had once gripped a control stick could carry. The question lingered over the beach like an unspoken challenge. Why would such an ordinary woman stand here, unmoving, her gaze sharper than any lens? And more importantly, what would happen when that raptor suddenly faltered? Rachel's face was calm, but her eyes never left the uneasy spiral of the raptor above. In her pocket, her fingers toyed with the jet-shaped keychain, the cold edge of the metal digging into her skin as if to remind her it was still there, still carrying its weight. It wasn't just a lifeless trinket. It was the only keepsake she had held on to from the days she wore the green flight suit days, when snapping her helmet shut meant stepping into a dance of life and death in the sky. It had once been a gift from a teammate who never came back from what should have been a harmless training flight. On the folding chairs nearby, a former pilot leaned back, eyes narrowing under the brim of a cap stitched with the words Vietnam Veteran. He glanced briefly at Rachel, tilted his head, then murmured to his friend, "I think I saw her once at Miramar, but no, must be wrong. That one quit early." Rachel heard every word, each syllable cutting into her memory like a blade. Her shoulders pulled back slightly, not to answer, but as an old reflex sparked by the mention of a place forever tied to her name. Then she exhaled, letting the whispers dissolve into the ocean breeze and the acrid smell of jet fuel. Children still cheered nearby, one boy waving an old silver toy plane, holding it high, mimicking the sound of engines with his mouth. Rachel's eyes flicked toward him, and for a fleeting moment, softened. She had once been that child, standing at the fence of an airbase, imagining the day she would command a real steel bird. But that dream came with a heavy price, one only those who had sat in the cockpit could ever understand. A group of young men tossed an empty soda can into the sand, their raucous laughter drowning out the loudspeakers. They pointed at Rachel, smirked, and turned away. To them, she was just a middle-aged woman out of place, nothing worth noticing. They had no idea that the fingers clutching that keychain had once gripped the control stick of the very raptors they gawked at above. Rachel stood still, her breaths deep and measured, like the breathing drills she taught her yoga students. She masked every surge within her with silence, as she had for 12 long years. But the cracks in her eyes betrayed her. Each time a jet banked, each time engines tore through the air, memories flared, comrades falling, the harsh blare of warnings in her headset, and the moment she chose to walk away. A woman in a bright sundress passed by, her gaze dripping with pity. Her painted lips pressed together before she turned, just enough for those nearby to burst into snickers. Rachel didn't respond. She only lifted her chin slightly, her eyes rising higher, as if searching for something beyond the reach of those jeers. Footsteps shuffled behind her, making her glance back. A young photographer pushed through the crowd, camera dangling at his side. His lens swept past Rachel, then dismissed her in an instant. To him, she wasn't worth a frame. He wanted fire, metal, and spectacle, not a woman standing still with her hands in her pockets. But if he had lingered just a second longer, he might have seen that in her eyes was something stronger than the roar of any engine. Rachel tightened her grip on the keychain. This small object had once sat with her in the cockpit, endured G-forces, heard the rush of air as the Raptor rolled and twisted overhead. It wasn't just metal. It was part of a story never told, a dignity buried under the dust of silence and prejudice. Farther away, an old man in a Navy cap leaned over, whispering something to his companion. They chuckled dryly, as though sealing off an old tale. Rachel heard them too. And this time, instead of turning away, she let their words sink into the palm now bleeding faintly from the keychain's edge. The dull sting reminded her. She was still alive, still remembering, and still hadn't let go of the sky inside her mind. The sky was deep blue, but in Rachel's eyes each white trail evoked another scene, A scorched desert in Nevada, a supersonic training run, a scream over the radio that cut off into silence. The name of her fallen comrade still lodged in her throat, never spoken aloud. That memory was the reason she walked away, and the reason she still stood here today, trapped in the loop of steel and remembrance. The crowd erupted when a jet flipped into a perfect inverted loop, but Rachel didn't clap. She only closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the wind, the engines vibrating through her ribs, knowing exactly what forces pressed down inside that cockpit. No one else around her could feel it. No one except someone who had once been there. And slowly, a question began to take shape among the crowd. Who really was this silent woman? Why did her eyes mirror those of a seasoned pilot, when the whole town only knew her as a yoga teacher? Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. The deep blue sky, clear as a giant mirror, suddenly tore open with a sharp crack. It wasn't the sound of fireworks or the usual roar of engines. It was sharp, dry, and cold, like the snap of breaking metal. Instantly, an F-22 lurched, its body tilting unnaturally, trailing a twisting coil of black smoke from its left engine. The emergency signal blared over the loudspeakers. The young pilot's voice fractured, trembling like a string pulled to its breaking point. I've lost control. SOS, requesting immediate assistance. The crowd's jaws dropped. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then chaos erupted. A mother yanked her child close, clutching him to her chest as she screamed. The children stopped cheering, their wide eyes fixed on the black smoke curling across the sky like an open wound. A group of young men pressed against the fence, phones held high, the glow of their screens reflecting in cheap sunglasses. They laughed, shoving each other, their jeers louder than the loudspeakers. A $400 million steel bird falling like a dime store toy. Their laughter rang out, callous and hollow, echoing against the panic. But one person didn't move. Rachel. She didn't scream, didn't turn away. She stood rooted, both hands deep in her pockets, squeezing the jet-shaped keychain until her nails cut into her skin. Each second, that tiny piece of metal sent a current through her hand, awakening instincts long buried. Her eyes locked onto the struggling raptor above, as if her gaze alone could pull it back to balance. Around her, footsteps thundered. People shoved and stumbled, surging toward the exits. The air filled with a storm of noise. Children crying, voices shouting, the speakers repeating urgent commands. Elderly men staggered up with trembling canes. The salty wind carried the acrid haze of burning fuel, smearing it across the sand and the sea. In that chaos, Rachel seemed to step outside the world. She could feel the crosswind slicing, the engine sputtering, the unsteady arc of the jet's path. Every shift, every tremor, she read them all without radar, without instruments. Her body remembered, her heart remembered, and most of all, the hands that had once gripped the stick remembered. For a split second, her eyes caught the boy's toy plane lying abandoned in the sand. The child had run after his mother, leaving the silver plastic jet stranded. The sight hit her hard, the fragile dream of childhood, when wings never broke and the sky never betrayed. Above, the raptor lurched harder. A small blast spat fire, the smoke spreading wider. The young pilot's voice cracked with panic. I can't hold it anymore." His last words stretched into raw terror. An old veteran in a cap shot to his feet, eyes lifted skyward, his lips moving in a prayer. But his whispers vanished in the din, unheard beneath the roar and screams. Rachel stayed where she was, her breathing fast but controlled. Her back was straight, a pillar in the storm. Her eyes never wavered from the jet in freefall. Brutal memories surged. Night flights over Nevada, teammates vanishing mid-comm, a sudden bloom of fire like a newborn Sunday. And the day she chose to walk away, believing she had buried the sky forever. Now fate was pounding on her door again. The question screamed inside her. Would she watch another life slip away right in front of her? The crowd around Rachel paid her no mind. They saw only a woman standing still, hands buried in the gray hoodie. They didn't know those hands trembled with restraint, that inside her chest old alarms and warnings still thundered. The F-22 above jerked sharply, dropping another few hundred feet, its black trail spreading like ink. The crowd gasped as one. Some buried their faces in each other's shoulders, too afraid to look. But Rachel didn't blink. Her gaze, steady as steel, followed every shudder, every gust battering the wounded jet, as though she were flying with it, feeling every tremor in her bones. In that suffocating moment, a silent question began to rise inside every onlooker. Was the past Rachel had hidden for so long strong enough to pull her back into the sky? The alarm siren shrieked, ripping through the thick air of panic. From the control tower, a commanding officer burst out, his uniform shaking on his shoulders, his voice booming louder than the ocean wind. Is there anyone here capable of flying a Raptor? The plea exploded across the sea of people, but the only answer was a dead silence. Hundreds of eyes darted around, waiting for some savior to step forward, but no one moved. Broad-shouldered men looked away, a few veterans lowered their heads, and the crowd shrank back, desperate for the responsibility to pass them by. In that void, Rachel drew a deep breath. She stepped across the barricade. The decisive motion made the crowd part, their stares a tangle of curiosity and contempt. Whispers rose behind her. What does she think she's doing? Probably just wants attention. A short, sharp laugh cut the air, cold as a blade. Rachel's steps were steady, neither rushed nor hesitant. Her plain gray hoodie fluttered in the wind, her worn shoes striking against the asphalt. Nothing about her spoke of belonging to the sky except the way her eyes never left the spiral of black smoke above. Inside the control room, where red warning lights glared from every screen, Rachel's presence seemed like a clumsy joke. A group of young officers clustered near the radar table stiffened at first, then smirked in unison. A major, his face flushed with tension and smugness, squinted at the woman in the hoodie from head to toe. Don't tell me, she's volunteering. His voice dragged, dripping with disdain. 12 years out of the cockpit, she'd have trouble flying a paper plane. Laughter broke out. A younger officer shook his head, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear. Just more chaos. Let the professionals handle this. Rachel didn't answer. She walked straight ahead, her hands still buried in her hoodie. Every eye clung to her, waiting for her to falter, waiting for the farce to end. But when she stopped before the command table, the air froze. Rachel reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, weathered leather case. Without explanation, she set it on the steel surface, firm and deliberate. The lid snapped open. Inside, a silver insignia gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The engraving was still sharp, though the edges of the metal had worn. Instructor, Top Gun, and the name, Lieutenant Rachel Carter. No one laughed now. The entire room seemed drained of air. The beeping of the warning monitors suddenly rang out, stark and haunting. The graying commander closest to her staggered a step forward, his weary eyes flying wide, his breath caught in his throat. His lips trembled, and the name spilled out like an echo from a past long buried. My God! Carter? Valkyrie Carter? A ripple of shock spread through the room. Faces that moments ago sneered now hung frozen. Some looked confused, others embarrassed, but all were trapped by the gleam of that insignia. Rachel raised her head, her eyes locked on the commander's calm, sharp, unyielding. Her voice came low, not loud but cutting through every murmur. Every half-laugh still hanging in the air. There's no time left. In that instant, the walls of prejudice, mockery, and doubt collapsed. The woman in the hoodie was no outsider. She was Valkyrie Carter, the legendary instructor they thought had vanished from the sky. The atmosphere shifted, like wind turning before a storm. Every gaze fixed on one point, the woman who had just laid her past on the table, ready to stake it one more time. And a burning question crept into every mind, even the viewers. Did Carter still have the strength to return to the sky where a life now hung by a thread? The hangar thundered, every metallic vibration ringing like the pounding drums of fate. Rachel climbed into the cockpit of the backup F-22 without a second's hesitation. Every movement was precise, as if her body had been programmed for this moment long ago. The harness locked tight across her shoulders, gloves gripped the stick, her breath deep and steady. The radio crackled to life, static splitting before a low, steady female voice tempered like steel forged over years. "Listen to me. Hold steady. I'll bring you home." On the other end, the young pilot's voice trembled, breath ragged, but he forced his panic down. "Yes, ma'am." Rachel pushed the throttle. The engine roared, the blast shaking the entire hangar, G-force slamming into her like a hammer. Her body was crushed into the seat, yet her hand stayed firm on the controls. The Raptor shot from the runway, steel gleaming in the sunlight. The speed surged, the frame shuddered, then the jet soared into the sky. The crowd below fell silent. Every eye followed her, old men who had jeered, children clutching plastic models, families who had doubted. They held their breath, waiting for disaster or a miracle. Rachel banked her wing, guiding the jet with the rhythm of a song etched deep in memory. Her Raptor slid up alongside the wounded aircraft, its battered frame shaking violently. Over the radio, her voice was steady, unshaken. "Left, 5 degrees. Hold your speed. Good. Don't lose me." The crippled F-22 spat black smoke, but the young pilot clung to her words, each one a lifeline pulling him back from the abyss. In the control room, those who had mocked her stood frozen, sweat trailing down their temples. The major who had smirked before couldn't force out a word. A technician bowed his head, whispering, "She's actually doing it." The sight above played out like a living theater. 2 Raptors, one whole, one broken, flew side by side, every movement locked together, a perilous dance on a wire of steel. Rachel matched each shudder, each tilt, her adjustment so sharp it was as if the 2 jets shared a single soul. Below, the group of young men who had laughed earlier stood mute, their phones still raised but hands trembling. A little boy hugged his toy jet tight, eyes wide, whispering almost like a prayer. Rachel didn't hear them. Didn't need to. Her world now was only the sky, the hammering of her heart, and the shaky voice of the young pilot in her headset. Every jolt, every red warning on the HUD screamed the same truth. One misstep, and they'd both become fireballs. But Rachel's gaze didn't flicker. Her hands carved invisible pathways, each correction terrifyingly precise. "Climb with me." Her voice was low, even, carrying the weight of command. "Stay with me." The crippled Raptor wavered, but followed. Each time it lurched from the path, Rachel cut across, wings shielding, guiding, almost forcing it back into the corridor of survival. The crowd's eyes stayed locked above. A woman in a business suit, who had once kept Rachel outside the barricade, bit her lip until blood welled, clipboard slipping from her hand. An old Navy veteran stood frozen, hand trembling against his cap, eyes wet without him realizing. On the radio, the young pilot broke, voice cracking. I can't hold it anymore." Rachel closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them, fire blazing through her stare. "Yes, you can. Hold on. Look at me." And somehow, impossibly, the wounded F-22 still clung to her, its smoke trail weaving into her flight path like an unbroken vow. Seconds stretched into centuries. Every heartbeat in the crowd below was an echo of the wings shuddering above. And then the runway came into sight, shimmering in the sunlight. Rachel inhaled deep. Her body tightened, her hands gripping the stick with unyielding force. This was the moment of decision. Could she bring the burning jet back to the ground alive, or was this about to replay the tragedy she had spent 12 years trying to bury? The wheels of the wounded F-22 screeched across the runway, skidding long and hard, leaving a black scar across the concrete. The jet tilted, swayed, then slowed, finally grinding to a halt in the dry rasp of metal on asphalt. Its engines went silent, the steel body shuddering like it had only just escaped death. Inside the cockpit, the young pilot slumped forward, breath ragged but alive. Right behind him, Rachel's Raptor touched down. The landing was so smooth it felt like a hand brushing the keys of a piano. The runway trembled beneath, but there was no jolt, no wasted motion. Perfect to the second. For a heartbeat, the entire base froze and then it erupted. The crowd broke into cheers. Voices crashed like waves against the shore. A mother holding her child burst into tears, laughing and shouting all at once in relief. The child lifted a toy plane high, eyes blazing with wonder. The group of young men who had mocked her earlier stared at the ground, phones still recording but hands trembling. Their faces burned red, their earlier laughter now hardened into shame. The woman in the floral dress, the one who had sneered, "You're better suited to gardening," stood silent, head bowed, fingers nervously working a string of beads in her pocket. This time the loudspeakers didn't blare chaos. Instead, they rang with choked triumph. "Aircraft down safely. Pilot alive." Applause thundered. Horns blared. Shouts rose to the sky. Some hugged each other, while a few veterans slowly removed their caps, pressing hands to their chests, eyes glistening. Inside the compound, soldiers assembled. Over 500 stood in perfect formation, rows aligned, hands snapping to their brows in unison. In the heavy silence that followed, the salt and pepper-haired commander stepped forward, eyes weighted yet burning bright. His voice boomed, echoing off the concrete walls and into every heart. "Captain Carter, you saved a pilot's life. You are still one of us." It wasn't just recognition. It was a bridge stretching from past to present, from forgotten to honored. In the ranks, a young figure shifted. The same soldier who that very morning had scoffed, 12 years makes reflexes fossilized. Now his face flushed crimson, his hand trembled as he stepped forward. Standing at attention, eyes fixed on his boots, he finally raised his head and saluted. His voice cracked, but the words rang true. "Ma'am, I was wrong. I'm sorry." The air grew heavy. Hundreds of eyes turned toward Rachel. She didn't speak, she only nodded. A small, steady nod that dissolved the invisible wall between them. Her eyes gleamed not with pride, but with the quiet realization that, at last, past and present could share the same sky. Her lips stayed pressed, no words needed. Outside, the spectators still roared. The little boy who had abandoned his plastic jet in the sand earlier now picked it up, brushed it clean, and lifted it high toward the sky. This time, he didn't make engine noises with his mouth. He just stood, staring at Rachel as she climbed from the cockpit, and in his eyes, she was larger than any superhero on a screen. The major who had mocked her in the control room stood at the back of the formation now, sweat soaking his collar. Silent, his fists clenched, head lowered. Sometimes, silence is the only apology a man can give. Rachel walked past, frame lean and steady in her flight suit. Her steps weren't hurried, weren't slow, but each one left a weight in the hearts of those watching. They saw a woman once dismissed as insignificant emerge from the shadows, and in just minutes she had overturned every doubt. What filled the air was more than applause, more than chance. It was transformation. A shift in how thousands of eyes saw her and what she meant. From Miss Carter, quiet, ordinary of Long Island, to Valkyrie Carter, a symbol of defiance and strength. One moment, one act, and the entire world around her had been rewritten. And a question hung heavy in every mind. If one person can return after 12 years of silence to save a life, how many other forgotten stories are still waiting to be told? Sunset settled over Coney Island Beach, the sky ablaze in red, painting the waves with strokes of fire. The air was thick with salt, the rhythm of the surf steady, blending with the fading roar of engines as the squadron returned to base. Rachel stepped out of the compound, her stride lighter than it had been that morning, as if 12 years of dust had been lifted from her shoulders and carried away by the ocean breeze. In her pocket, the jet-shaped keychain still rested, but it no longer pressed against her chest like a stone wedged in her heart. This time, when her fingertips brushed its cold metal edge, she felt a strange warmth, not a wound, but proof. Proof that 12 years of silence hadn't erased who she was. It had only let that truth lie dormant, waiting for the moment to awaken. Behind her, hundreds of service members still stood at attention. The sight no longer looked like stiff military protocol, but like silent recognition. A few held their salutes, eyes fixed, as if to carve this moment into collective memory. Those who once doubted, once mocked, now stood as quiet witnesses to a return none had ever expected. Ahead, the sky glowed crimson like a wound finally stitching closed. Another F-22 roared upward, slicing across the horizon, its engines thundering like the heartbeat of an entire community reborn. The sound was no longer threat, but anthem honoring the past, the present, and the souls that had fallen but never vanished. Rachel lifted her head, her eyes shimmered, catching the fiery sweep across the skyline. She no longer avoided their gaze, no longer bowed as if she didn't belong. The sky still knew her name. And now, so did everyone else. Children rushed to the fence line, toy jets clutched in their hands, raised toward the heavens. A boy shouted her name, voice ringing clear, louder than the surf. Parents turned, smiling, some snapping photos, others simply holding their children's hands a little tighter. They understood. Today they hadn't only witnessed a rescue, they had been reminded of a lesson in faith and resilience. Rachel walked on, the sea breeze tossing her hair. In the dusk light, her figure merged with the blazing sky, becoming part of a canvas larger than any single fate. The laughter, the sneers, the years of dismissal, all of it washed away like foam dissolving in the tide. She needed no applause, no title. It was enough to know she had once again done what she was born to do. Save lives, keep her promise to the sky. And in her quiet, Rachel smiled. If you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, told you don't belong, then this story is for you. Because the truth is, you were never wrong, you were never alone. And maybe, with just one moment of courage to step forward, you could make the whole world see you differently. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.